Interesting story of them all. Zana from Russia, an Alma. Remember I told you that the Almas were also man-sized, 5 to 7 feet tall, 300, 600 pounds, and they're dominant in Russia and the Orient. This is Alma, the living Neanderthal. This is one of them right here. This is Zana, is an Alma, was an Alma. Now, understand this. In the Orient, the tradition when one of these things is captured, for whatever reason, was to kill it immediately. Desiccate its body and sell its body parts for medicine, principally aphrodisiacs. That's the Oriental tradition. In the Russian area, though, when they would be captured, male or female, they would be used as slaves. Physical slaves. Held, spirits broken in these primitive villages where they would be, and they would be used to carry wood, fetch water, do the haying, all the heavy work nobody really wants to do. Make the slave do it. And so that became their fate. And for females, another aspect of it was they had to become the sex slaves of the men of the area. And that was one of the other great advantages to having a female. And so, this is the fate that befell Zana in about 1850. She was captured as an adult in 1850. We do not know how old she was. She was an adult. She was taken to the village of Tikina, where they kept her in a hole for about 3 years until her spirit was broken enough to let her wander around. She was dependent on them for food, and then they began to train her to fetch wood, fetch water, do the things that she had to do. And she became like the village pet for 40 years. She died in 1890. Now, how do we know this? Because in Orient and Russia, they don't have the same tradition that we have. They're very old countries. They've been living with this for a very long time, for centuries. They know they're real. They send researchers out taking information about it. They send teams out trying to find them. Well, they used to when Russia had money. They don't now. But this was done in the mid-1970s. Excuse me, I'm sorry, mid-1960s. This research was done in the mid-60s. So, in the mid-1960s, this is an area of Kazakhstan where she lived, where people live very long lives. You know, those places in the world where people live up around 120 years old. So they had over 100 people above the age of 80 that had known her quite well in their youth. There were 10 still alive who had attended her funeral. So they were able to get tremendous corroborative evidence, corroborative testimony about her lifestyle, and everything about her from all these different people, so we have an amazing view of what she was like and what her life was like. Again, a lot of which I go over in the book. But the main thing is that she never learned to speak, but she learned the language. They could talk to her and she'd know what they meant. And while there, she gave birth 8 times to hybrids with men of the village. 8 times. Killed the first 4 accidentally, because her kind apparently washes the newborn off immediately. She would take it to the freezing glacial river that ran through the village, and because they had so much human in them, it would kill them. So the last 4, the village women took them from her at birth and raised them on their own, because they looked so human. And every pair of hands was very valuable in one of those primitive villages like that. And so they raised them up, and they became Russian citizens. Married, had children. Her great-grandchildren are alive in Russia to this day. I know, it's an amazing story. Now, what do people say from her at birth and raised them on their own? Because they looked so human, and every pair of hands was very valuable in one of those primitive villages like that. And so they raised them up, and they became Russian citizens. Married, had children. Her great-grandchildren are alive in Russia to this day.
To this day.
I know, it's an amazing story. Now, what do people say about her children? Well, everybody said that they were indeed taller than most, bigger than most, a little more robust than most, but not giants, not superhumans, just strong, you know, big and strong people. Darker skinned than most, but not truly Negroid. Hair like, you know, everybody, but not covered in hair like she was. Average intelligence, not wizards, not stupid. Ugly enough to make a freight train take a dirt road. Unfortunately for them. But they could speak. That's the key. They could all speak. They had very high-pitched voices, but they could speak, which allowed them to integrate into the community as humans, even though they were clearly not quite humans. So the researchers were real excited to get all this information. It's like, wow, And they knew where she was buried. She was buried in the village cemetery. Unfortunately, this is a Muslim area. They don't mark gravestones there. So they knew she was in the village cemetery, which had existed for centuries, and they couldn't say just where, because of the 10 people that were alive, they all had different memories of where it had been. Who knew that 70, 80 years later somebody was going to care? So they couldn't decide. They couldn't, and they would have had to bulldoze the whole thing. The village wouldn't let them do that. So somebody says, well, guess what? Her youngest son, Kvit, died in 1954, only 10 years prior to this study. So they said, we know where he is. We'll let you dig him up. So, boy, they dug him up. Her youngest son, Kvit. Now, before we look at his skull, I want to say again, remember, Neanderthals had bigger brains than we did, and they carry them, we do rather, they carry them in a bun in the back of their head called the occipital bun. All right, let's take a look at Kvit's skull. Here you go, right here. Notice, if you will, that's a remnant of an occipital bun right there. Notice how much of a forehead he doesn't have. Look at the size of these brow ridges. Look at that eye socket. Is it starting to look familiar? Look at the size of that nasal passage. Look at the size of these teeth. Look at the size of that jawbone. Look at the size of the cheekbone. But look at that chin. Allows him to speak. This is an ugly dude, kids. This is a Neanderthal, basically. This is a guy you do not want to meet in a dark alley. Now, what, of course, anthropologists say is that he is an extreme variation on the human norm. An extreme, real extreme variation on the human norm. But that's how the musculature in here. And the strength of these things is amazing. Amazing. You could take a male chimp like this, not a gorilla, and put it in a room with Mike Tyson. It's a battle to the death. And they both understand that. 2 or 3 minutes, this chimp is walking out. Now, he may be missing an ear or two. But the chimp is walking out. The chimp can tear him limb from limb, literally, apart. Understand that. Primate strength is nothing at all like human strength. Next slide. Same thing for Neanderthals, our supposedly closest nearest kin until just recently. Neanderthal fingertip bone, human fingertip bone. Segment of Neanderthal thigh bone, human thigh bone. Look at the difference. Not even close. This is quarters to dimes.
So they are built different than you. See the density? Now look at how dense this is. This is you. They're built like a rock. This is their fingertip. This is your fingertip. They are built stronger, longer lasting than you.
Shovel handles to broomsticks. No
it's
comparison.
Like comparing shovel handles. It's like comparing the higher stick, shovel handle, to a mere broomstick. That's their bones compared to your bones. And every time I type in Xana, this guy eventually shows up. All these pictures he takes with people, they're doing a comparison. And he doesn't know it. The sloping forehead and the pointed chin that allows him to talk.
Our supposed, and we used to be told, absolutely, they insisted, they swore. We came directly from those guys. Even looking at this kind of evidence, that is what they insisted. Why? Because they have to explain it in terrestrial terms. Understand that science is
they do. So, Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, and it says, there were giants in the earth in those days, and after that, and also after that, when the sons of God, that's children of God, came unto the daughters of men came into women. That's conception. And they were pregnated, and they what? Conceived children to them. To what? To the sons of God. The same became, that act, they then became mighty men, which were of old. There should be a comma there. Mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Excuse me, there shouldn't be a comma there. So we have three definitions. There were giants. Okay, so you have giants. It doesn't say giant men. It says giants. So there were giants of all sorts. There were giant insects, there were giant what? Apes. He will later in this video call them pre-humans. He will separate the hominoid from different classes. There were giants when the sons of God came.
Strong. They've painted themselves into a corner. They have to explain everything in terrestrial terms. They do not allow for outside intervention, whether that outside intervention is extraterrestrial or divine.
We have a ruler, a rule of thumb to go by. It is called a Bible. The Old Testament testifies we were like grasshoppers to them. What we're looking at is different classes that now blend into men. You see this man today, but after generations of breeding with humans, their bloodline or their numerous bloodlines would look normal. After he mates with someone of this size, they'll produce a child shorter than him. And eventually his grandchildren or great-grandchildren will be the size of her, but still retain the gene passed on by the male.
And so they have to come up with explanations like this to suit the data, which doesn't at all support their conclusions. Okay, next slide. All right, here's some drawing that shows it a little more accurately what the prehumans are vis-a-vis the humans. Notice that in the drawings the hands are down pretty much where they belong relative to ours. Also notice the rib cages are the upside down funnels of primates in the prehumans as opposed to ours. What's the situation there? Well, you can't tell it very well from here, but all of the prehuman heads are stuck on their bodies like that, the way primates are. Their heads are down in on their
You ever hear somebody getting made fun of because they don't got no neck? You ever walk by a group of guys making fun of one of their buddies because he ain't got no neck? It looked like his head is just attached right to his what? To his collarbone.
Shoulders. Only we have that elevated neck sticking our head up off of our torso. They also have that extra arm length and that extra power, and so they need a bigger fulcrum up here to wing their arms and do what they have to do. So all of that extra muscle mass plus the head torque down in there squeezes out the room, and so you're going to get that pinched off triangle that primates have. And we, with our shorter, lighter arms and lighter bones, we don't need all that muscle mass, and we got our heads sticking up, so we have a completely different rib cage. I want you to understand that. Now, the main thing to understand here is there is not a single human bone in the so-called prehuman fossil record. The main thing I want you to understand, there's not a single human bone in the so-called prehuman fossil.
None of our genes, none of our chromosomes are in them. Yet, some of their chromosomes are in some of us. Not all of us, some of us. There were giants in the earth in those days. In the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. 3 different titles, 3 different definitions. Giants, comma. Mighty men which were of old, comma. Men of renown. 3 different titles, 3 different definitions.
Record. And guess what? Anthropologists will not argue the point with you. An idiot can see it. An idiot can see it. All you got to do is point it out to them. Well, they know that. So they say, you're right, you're right. There's not a single human bone in the pre-human fossil record, even though we insist that these are indeed pre-humans. The reason we can get away with this is because we're going to put somebody right in here that's going to show a transition between these guys, and that is the missing link, the famous missing link. You've all heard about that. This is what it is. This is the thing that's going to stand right in here and miraculously show a smooth transition from this to this. Well, I tell you what, if the missing link was here today, he would need about 20 or 30 cousins standing right beside him, showing enough gradual transition to make this plausible. You don't just get one missing link. You need dozens to make this theory work of gradual transition, the Darwinian paradigm. And they don't even have so much as a fingernail, not a fingernail, of the missing link. Which leads us to conclude that Charles Darwin is a blowed-up peckerwood. However, they will not concede.
Now, did you understand that this white man used a racist term to his own caucus member? He's trying to not humor you. You've got to understand. He's trying to fight white supremacy, which is science. See, Darwin is considered a scientist because you've got to understand, creationism isn't in schools. Evolution is taught to you. They show you animals going through evolution to say you're a fucking animal too, and you're not getting it. You're a man and you don't have angel blood in you, so they consider you a monster, even though in reality our creator and their creator already expressed that they, the controlling force, is the monster. That's why it's called the system of the beast. Beasts rule it. You've got to understand what's really going on.
That fingernail that's missing in that direction. Darwin's still intact, everything's still okay. Neanderthals and the archaics, their brains are expanding back here in what's called an occipital bun, but they're getting bigger every step of the way. They were leaving fossils. And guess what? You leave fossils in the premoniches, in the prairies, savannas, grasslands, lightly wooded areas. Why? Because it's very unique that a fossil gets formed of this kind, because you have to die in very specific circumstances. You have to get caught in a flash flood so that your body is washed away, covered up by mud, so predators can't get you. Your flesh.
Does that lead us right back to Genesis? You've got to be caught in a flash flood while you're in valleys, in prairies. You've got to get caught in a bowl situation. This is a glass. Pretend this is a mountain wall going this way, and this is a mountain wall going this way. You got caught in there, and everything eroded underneath what? The mountain peaks. And you got buried. And that's how they found these skulls. They got buried in the flood.
Rights off, the minerals leach into your bones, and you become stone, and you become a fossil. Or you get killed at the water hole. One day you're really tired, you're really hot, you're not paying attention, you go down to drink, the lion jumps on your back, kills you right there at the edge of the water hole, and then the wildebeest herd comes up behind him, run him off, stomp you down into the mud, and now same process. You're covered by mud, your flesh rots off, your bones are, the minerals leach into your bones, and you become a fossil, and that's it. That's pretty much it. It's very hard to form a fossil otherwise. And so we see how miraculous that process is.
You see how intact these skulls are. These ancient skulls that have been dug up out of mud are. They haven't been stomped into the ground. That's why he presented it that way. You had to be caught in a flash flood.
Is just to make them in the first place, and then millions of years later it washes up, or whenever it washes up, and somebody sees it that knows what it is and can recognize it and can save it. It's miracle stacked on miracle. That's why they're so few, and they're so rare, and they're so precious because of that. Now understand this, that in the deep woods and jungles of the world, they don't make fossils. It doesn't happen. You get your water out of the environment. You don't have a water hole. You get out of your food and things like that. It will surprise you to know that there is not, to this day, a single...
Now, when you go to the jungle and you're thirsty, he just told you, you get your water out of the plants. There is no watering hole in the jungle.
Solitary fossilized bone of a chimpanzee in the world that we know about. They just don't make fossils. So, instead of them...